everybody, it's Tuesday, and welcome into this episode of Loaded and Rolling. I'm Kaylee Nix, not your usual host, moonlighting here for the one and only Thomas Wasson. Can imitate him in form, but never in personality. Thomas, how does it feel to be in the guest seat?
It feels really nice. Usually being the host, you're interviewing, you're getting ready, you're getting prepped. And I thought, well, I did something useful today. I went on this journalistic gonzo-style trip to an innovation conference, and it was wild. And I thought that, well, what better thing to do instead of writing about it than getting to talk about it and share my stories.
There you go. So we're going to answer some burning questions right now in this show. We're going to talk about where in the world you were. And I'm going to bury the lead a little bit here, but we're going to talk about why parking in Nashville is absolutely ridiculous. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about if there's actually room in the logistics space for yet another tech conference. So start us off. Where the heck were you last week?
So we were in Nashville, Tennessee. And if those of you don't understand Nashville, it has various rings like Dante's Inferno, various levels of hell. So you go through the outer ring of Nashville and you think, well, this is okay. I'm going to be stuck in traffic. I'm going to hop this other road. Well, there's an inner ring. And like Atlanta, which has the large parkway to remove your hope and various smaller roads, Nashville decided to be like an onion. So it was rough going in. It's raining. I'm stuck in traffic. It's 8:30. I didn't think this through. I should have checked with a person and made sure I showed up later, but we live and we learn. Next time, just fly. Just don't even try driving in that place. The locals were talking about back roads. I swear we took like a buggy route going to one of the events in a bus.
So, we're going to get to that story here in just a little bit. But I will say that Nashville, again, I'll agree with you. Maybe not my favorite place to drive. But when it comes to conferencing, pretty good place to host a conference, right? You were there at the Motive Vision 24 Innovation Summit, and we're going to be talking about that plus AI. And while that's a mouthful, I think that it's important to highlight kind of the big transportation hub that Nashville's becoming. Talk to us a little bit about the conference and why you decided to head up there for the week.
So it was fun. It's a telematics conference. This is a hardware provider. So I took these pictures as well. I'm an amateur photographer. There's someone's head right there if you see in the bottom left if you're watching. I sat behind the actual presenters, and there's a very tall person in front of me. So during the conference, you'd see my arms shoot up very high in the air trying to capture these shots on my iPhone. So just a little preface here. But Nashville is a really cool place. It's a hub. It's big. I was there back in 19 for a Tenacious D concert. There's a lot of construction. Now in 24, they finished the construction. They're adding some more. So you're looking at a density in urban development. And, for this event, it was really nice because some of the customers and the transportation providers were in and around Nashville. And we got to showcase the technology. I've got a real fun story about how the AI dash cams work when I was in a bus, especially Nashville traffic. It's really humorous.
So Nashville itself, as we mentioned, starting to become kind of this hub for transportation. We're seeing a bunch of companies really set up shop there. The decision to bring Motive Vision there, you can see, you've got 6 people on that panel right there. So pretty well attended. 250 attendees, or they expected 250 and had over 500 actual there. So double their expectations. Why did so many people decide that this was the place to go?
Well, it's fascinating. We work at FreightWaves. We have freight tech. We have a wide variety of audiences. But also there's the subset in the hardware providers where you can get actual customers, interested customers. And the vibe was really cool because it was more functional people. There were fewer. Now you had
real users?
Yes. Real users, real business. There's a guy talking about how he's doing carbonization and he's turning his construction equipment into net zero carbon construction equipment and using the cameras, little things like that. So it was kind of a big shock for me because we're used to seeing, check out this new TMS. This was my fun little rants now. This brand new API connection. So it took them about 10 years. The AI stuff on the hardware, they've been around for over 10 years. And it wasn't until 17 and 18 when it started taking off and they started training these models. So imagine in this freight tech space, we look at the freight tech top 25. It's real quick to spin something up, but it takes a long time to build something. So this was a cool time for me and for these conference attendees because we're seeing technology mature in the commercial side that previously we'd only see it the Teslas and the automotive side for the consumer.
Right. So at this point in the, I guess, kind of tech evolution, I would say the hardware of a dash cam is pretty standard practice for a lot of these major carriers, right? We know that it is now a use to protect against insurance fraud or claims or liability, things like that. But where does the AI really come into play with this? You mentioned carbon neutrality, but for folks who are putting it in, I think we've got a video here showing what the actual camera does, right? Can you walk us through kind of how it operates and then how it's different from the traditional camera that you might have in your truck?
So look at the fact that it's both front facing and outward facing. So it faces the driver, it faces the cab, but look how it's also telling them this is a distracted driver demonstrating it. And so when we talk about situations, see how it's noticing oncoming traffic, and there's a time to target at the very, very top. Look at that, 0.3, 0.4. So it's automatically changing behaviors. The biggest thing, this is one of the guys, yawning. It's gotten to the point where it's like, hey, you're drowsy. Pay attention. Oh, look at that. We're back green. And so this wasn't actually from a customer as well, where it will give you notifications and it's there to help protect the carrier. So the fascinating thing with this tech, as we're showcasing this and looking at these dash cams, is that typically it has been reactive. Trying to get your drivers, this was what was noted at the conference, before we've gotten the maturing of dashcam technology, the issue was you had to wait for motorists to complain, customers to complain, or just an accident to happen. So the biggest change we're seeing now, and is from this footage, for those of you who are just listening to the podcast, is that we're able to see a driver-facing camera, a dash camera, and then eventually there's side cameras as well that are able to proactively identify and try and correct behaviors while you're on the road. We haven't had that capability until very recently, the last few years. So the big game changer is, the big takeaway from all of these changes is that we are shifting the very fundamental expectations of a driver to actually know what the heck you're doing, and we can find out if you're good or not, and we're going to scorecard it if you're not.
So that brings up a really fascinating point for me, because for drivers in some of these cases, a lot of them have this like big hesitation when it comes to technology, right? They say, okay, I don't want a camera that's watching me the whole entire time I'm in my truck. I don't want a camera to sit there to tell me, hey, you blinked for 2 seconds too long, like pull over, you need to take a rest break. They're hesitant to accept that kind of tech, but we know that it works. It works in preventing accidents. It works in providing these safety recommendations to the carrier group so then they can go and educate the drivers a little bit more. And it works in protecting against that liability like we talked about. Was there any discussion about some of the hesitancies from this AI technology and kind of where Motive sits in that and what they're doing to kind of, I guess, remove that hesitancy?
There was, and that's the part of customer testimonials. That's the fun part as well. You get the folks who are using the product, they want to convince other people to use it. One of the challenges was safety and privacy, like you mentioned. And the drivers at first were worried, well, is it going to listen to me? It's facing me in the cab. They were really concerned about, I'm calling my family, I'm talking to my significant other, I don't want to hear that. So the executives talked about how the first step they had to do was just say, look, we're installing these. We're not just going to roll this out. We're going to slowly work up to this, and we're going to make sure that we're going to have your privacy in mind. You have to communicate it. It boils down to setting the tone, the expectation, and saying that this will also benefit you if something happens. Also, looking at cell phones. This is a huge problem for smaller short hauls. So not just for trucking. Trucking still is trying to overcome it, but for work trucks and construction equipment and motor coaches, this is really fascinating, because I talk a lot about trucking, but you forget that the applications of this technology far extend past anything with needing a dash cam. So that was the first step. The second step was, after you've gotten folks comfortable enough, sometimes you lose a few people, sometimes you don't, you then try to create the new safety culture. Because in the past, you just send daily messages, hey, watch the road, don't do this. But now in the present, if you've got a speeding event, I can call you up and say, hey, Bob, I see that you went about 65 over in a 55. I'm pulling the data here. We had like a hard braking, or we had a hard speeding event here. I'm also looking back, and you're on your cell phone. So you get this holistic ability to coach. And speaking of coaches, that was what they were using for the motor coaches. So we had a press pool. We arrived on day one. It was Encore. They do luxury coaches, and they tour stars like country music stars. They hauled the bands. And so one of the biggest goals for them was to make sure that if you're transporting famous star, you don't just slam your brakes. You can there's a certain way to drive in these things. So that was one of the fascinating things, was it was actually very safety focused and tech focused. And we hear a lot from other freight tech providers, but we don't actually get into the functional nitty gritty of being safe. A broker wants to sell you a load, but as long as you don't screw up their load, you can screw up the next load, and that's another broker's problem. So we see that a lot in our conversations. So there is a big difference, and that's what surprised me as well, was that a lot of the topics, and there's another one on regulation, and there's a few other things I got to see, was that just how important it was, and we forget just how big a deal if you screw it up and you're not safe.
So they gather this data, they're using this AI technology, they keep a tab on their drivers, they start running these reports. What is the tangible benefit that comes out of it? Are we seeing a drop in insurance rates? Are we seeing a drop in accident reports? Are we seeing an increase in carrier safety scores? What is the tangible data that comes out of dragging this out of your dash cam and then analyzing it?
Night and day. There's like 50 to 90% reductions. There's a picture, a slide up there somewhere that they're showcasing on their slide deck. I may have taken a photo of it as well in one of the files, but the first thing they noticed was the amount of accidents went down because they're able to coach and improve driver behavior. The second thing was, if you have 5,000 trucks, or let's say you're a multinational company that has construction equipment, traditional insurance carriers will offer you a policy on all of them because they assume you are using them all. So one of the customers was like, we pulled the data, we put the dash cams in, we figured out how many of these are actually driving, and we could identify who's logging in. We were able to negotiate like a substantial discount because we finally had the data to show that here's my actual risk profile. Maybe half my fleet is only running Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and out of a 5,000 person company, 1,000 of those people are drivers. I don't need that much policy. And for insurance providers, they're super excited as well, because for them, we're finally getting information and we're seeing lane change and stuff where a carrier can then have their safety score and say, look, compared to the other people in my profile, I am better. Here's the data. I want to pay less money. And the insurance carrier is like, yeah, I'm cool with this because you're going to save me money by not screwing me over, so there are some tangible benefits. Those were the biggest top of mind things. And the cool thing is they introduced this new AI cam called AI OmniVision. So we're looking at one of the cams that has this AI capability, but they now allow you to just stick it places. And there was one of them that could identify if you're wearing a hard hat or not.
Wow.
On a job site, which is a big deal because if something falls on your head and you die on a job site, you can like shut down an interstate construction. There's a whole mess of things. So they're attaching them on cranes, and you can have safety even off the road.
So you mentioned, of course, this was a hardware conference, but there is a little bit of a software component to it. And the difference in this is how all of these cameras are communicating to each other. Talking to me about the mesh network versus a traditional communication sense for this freight tech software.
I'm going to compare it to my favorite Christopher Nolan movie, The Dark Knight, the Batman movie. So in this scene, there's you're trying to figure out how to catch somebody, and one of the technology wonders of the early 2000s was letting every cell phone ping an area, and it was called a mesh network to identify an entire building, a person. Well, the telematics capability now is going to be pinging it to find and manage equipment. So this is the really cool thing. What they were rolling out and what they're developing now is, imagine you own a company with construction and I own a trucking company, and our yard's right next to your job site. Well, all my tractors are gone. This is an unsecured drop yard, but your vehicles coming in and out of your location are pinging my trailers and vice versa. You're creating a network that, regardless of if you are a specific customer, it's helping find equipment. Because that was one of the other challenges, was that people lose equipment. When I was at US Express, we had like 3 people dedicated because there was like 15 to 20,000 trailers. You lose like 150 of them. They just disappear. I found one time in a drop yard. It had like $3 million worth of cargo in it. And
wow.
I thought I was getting fired that day, but someone else screwed up. So, it happens. But like, that is the future that we're opening up, that I think a lot of people are forgetting, that it takes tortoise in the hare. Hardware is the tortoise. Hare is the sexy freight tech. The tortoise is catching up right now. And for one of the takeaways is, for these tech-light companies, asset-light brokerages and their asset-light TMSs, it's not a big leap for the folks who have the data. They're growing their own data. I told their CEO that you have an advantage. It's like, I'm harvesting my own stuff. Why do I need to just pass it off to you?
Yeah.
That's something to watch for in the coming years, because they are slowly catching up, these ELD manufacturers. And if they want to make it holistic, it's going to be really hard to just be able to sell someone for a few hundred extra bucks a month check out this really cool TMS overlay for your loads, but then 75% of your stuff that actually does your day-to-day is being optimized by your provider.
All right, so now that we've kind of covered the tech and everything that you saw at the conference, we're going to move into actual conference hot takes about this, because as we know, this is specified to Motive, to their customers, to their hardware, et cetera, et cetera. And as I mentioned, 250 expected attendees with 500 there isn't necessarily a massive group. It's not like a TIA conference that happened last week, that had, probably over 1,400 people there, if I were to assume.
I think in the thousands with those.
I don't know.
Even your manifest is.
Let's call Ann Ranky up really fast,
Hey.
and we'll talk to her about that. But I mean, I think that it's very niche, right? It's very specific. It's very hardware specific. Do we think that this is the way that the industry sees more success in conferences, is to maybe step away from those kind of big, all-encompassing groups? And I'd say this is people, FreightWaves, who we run these big conferences, right? This is no shade to any of our events here. But do we think that that's the way of the future, is creating these kind of more low-key, specialized events where people can go talk to real customers, talk to real users, and it's almost a little bit more salesy, but it's also more of a better use case for your product, whether that's software or hardware, right?
Definitely. And one of the big ones is feedback. So hardware, imagine you're working with all of these customers. And I had an example because my wife's startup uses the Motive app. And I'm looking at the DVIR, which is your inspection report, and it's alphabetized. So I gave him a hard time. I showed up at the conference and I talked to the guy in charge of all of the product. There's 3,500 people at Motive, by the way. So I talked to the bro in charge of all of their product. I'm like, why is this alphabetized? And he looks at me and laughs and he goes, you can adjust that, right? You can edit that. And I was like, wait, really?
You can filter by how you want. It's like shopping online.
Yeah, you can make your own. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna go give my old startup a hard time. Now I know who to get to gig. But that illustrates an example of how sometimes through the traditional channels, when we're looking in technology, get the feedback, put it in the product roadmap, see if we can release it, check for bugs, get the feedback. Same with Sonar and every other one. These conferences help us. Just like with FreightWaves, we can get direct Sonar feedback from customers who may be afraid to speak up, or they're so high up that they just don't have time. Like if I'm the CEO, I spoke to one carrier with 3,200 trucks. Like if you're at that level, you don't really have time to go through a rep of a rep of a rep of a rep.
Right.
You're going to go to this conference and get the feedback direct. So it's mutually beneficial. I think we're going to see more of this, and it makes sense because a lot of times the customers really want to showcase it. And so I would say this is something to keep an eye out for. We are seeing this arms race of conferences with newer ones popping up, but the telematics and the hardware ones are definitely worth watching because even though they're smaller, the access can be greater because you actually have more functional people who may be willing to talk and not always try to sell you stuff. There's value in each conference. Some are salesy, some are not. So this one was really cool just because it was a little less, it was still salesy, but it was a closed loop system.
Yeah.
They're all the same customer or wanting to be about to be a customer.
That makes sense like that. Let's move on to my next burning question from our open here. Parking in Nashville. You got a fun little story about that one.
I didn't know it was that bad. Now, Chattanooga, we're a smaller town, $15 for a night, $20. I thought it was highway robbery. Show up in Nashville, park at this place called the W. It turns out it's like a 5-star hotel. That's right. I'm media privileged. I'm sorry, folks. I had to pay $62 a night, which is very expensive from Chattanooga standards. Someone in New York's going to laugh at us right now, and they're going to say it's like 100. But look across the street. And he goes, well, it's $42 a night right next door, but your vehicle may get broken into. Because we're in an area called the Gulch. It's gentrifying, people. There was a liquor and package store across the street. So if I needed to, if the bar closed, there was still a good spot. But that was one of the shocks. We talk about truck parking, which can be like 15, 20
Yeah, I was going to say, don't think that I didn't ask that question without a relation to truck parking, because I was going to bring it on back.
The truck parking folks may gawk at the price for a TA Pilot Petro. Loves is still free for all, so they don't count. Like at $15, but man, you go to some cities, this is just highway robbery. At least they didn't offer to take my firstborn, so that was progress.
Would you have felt better if you stayed in either a truck parking club location, free plug for those guys, or at one of those public parking spots, a public truck stop?
Oh man, that would have been a little
Where
wild.
do you feel safer, the Nashville Gulch or a public truck parking stop?
Oh, it depends. I'm gonna go a little spicy and say probably the truck stop, because there's some people in there with some weapons and stuff. So if anything ever went down, I'd trust the truck stop bros compared to the Gulch, which is relatively I'm in an inaccessible garage. I'm waiting for a valet. I'm just gonna you're very cloistered in one spot. So at least at a truck stop, I have options.
There you go. All right, Thomas, let's round this up kind of talking about your experience conferencing in general, because you go and you're there to both cover, but also learn. And you're there to connect with guests to bring on this show. You are there to talk about some of the latest tech and things that come up. What is it like covering a conference from a media standpoint versus being there from an operations standpoint, like what you used to do?
It was really fascinating because not only was it first time for me being in a media press pool. I'm normally a market expert. I show up, I talk about specified topics, but I was also a panelist. So I had the cool little panelist thing. I felt a little bit like a VIP. You'll find out that if you have, everyone had the black lanyards. I had the white beige colored
They
lanyard.
let you go wherever and they give you free food.
They do. And then people will pretend to talk to you because like they either feel bad because you don't have anyone to talk to, or I really felt like my ego was being stroked here because people seemed much more excited. Now, I love working FreightWaves events, but I'm normally doing interviews. I'll be on the FreightWaves TV stage. But at the same time, like you don't really get the cool VIP swag. It's not like when we have our speakers come in as well and we're showing them around and stuff. So that was one of the big takeaways. The second thing was it also gives you feedback for other conferences. What are some ways we can improve? What are some ways we do things well at conferences versus other ones? And so, you really do appreciate having the media training and the functional. Because if I was just functional, I'd show up to this conference, I'd sit through some of the stuff. But now that I'm outside of operations and I've dipped my toes into media and podcasting, you can really appreciate the little nuances in terms of how maybe some of the interviews went, how some of the little table. We had the picture earlier of one of the fireside chats, and so that was a really cool takeaway. Having it all come together compared to just being so pigeonholed.
So we're going to bring it all the way home and spend the last 5 minutes shamelessly plugging what's coming up with us here at FreightWaves, because it's our show, it's our platform. We get to do whatever the heck that we want. And let's bring that around to talk about future of supply chain, because coming up here in just a little under a month, I think it's 6 weeks total, we will be in Atlanta, Georgia, June 4th and 5th at the convention center down there. And we know that FreightWaves events are one of the most highly coveted of the season, I would say. And we're going to have a great time there. Thomas, are you going to join me on stage, and will we have matching outfits? Everyone wants to know.
Hey, you put me on stage, I'll wear whatever outfit you need. That's how if you guys, if we're gonna match outfits, we can match outfits. I have no shame. I used to be in theater before I came into transportation. But I digress. These are really fun events because FreightWaves events bring a lot of hype, but they also bring a diverse crowd. So I just talked about how I came from a specific conference with specific telematics. But one of the cool things was ours is we do get people outside. So Fortis Analysis, Huntsman, he's a really cool guy. You see him on the X platform. He's going to be one of the speakers at the event in Atlanta. He always brings some really cool geopolitical insights. We're getting a guy from Flexport going to be coming and talking about stuff.
Yeah, not just let's not discount Ryan Peterson here. Not just a guy from Flexport. We have Ryan Peterson, CEO and founder, the guy, the CEO that took a step back and then was like, nah, man, this is my company. I got to bring it back here. He's at TypesFest on Twitter, or X, formerly known as Twitter, whatever you want to call it. Go give him a follow. He's pretty great. But Ryan Peterson's going to be there. Bill Drager's going to be there, who used to work at Uber Freight, now works at Flexport. We have, of course, all the fine folks from JB Hunt. You see the Porsches up there? That's part of one of our interactive experiences. So all that to say, if you haven't bought your ticket yet, you should go do it.
Definitely want to be getting the tickets here. And, we have the upcoming events as well in November. It's important as well to highlight the value of trying to show up to both. A lot of times our future of supply chain is very forward-looking.
It's a little more shipper-focused, too.
And we have some shippers there on the customer list. And that's another thing they're going to be looking for is who's showing up. I remember when I was getting permissions to go up to in Nashville, we wanted to get a list. Then you want to coordinate, see if you can talk to certain people because maybe you have a customer segment you're targeting. And then the F3 is just really like a festival in November. It's like a big celebration at the end, a big explanation point for the end of our traditional conference season. So I do think that it does have that nice kind of balancing effect because we do see with other conferences, they're normally standalone or maybe they're smaller. The vibes are going to be different. But it's fascinating. Getting to go to one and getting to participate in more of them is super fun. We have a lot of FreightWaves people who do get around to other conferences, but for yours truly, this was a special moment. That's why I'm being interviewed today. It was my first one, so
there you go. So live.freightwaves.com will get you registered for all of those. I'm not going to say that we're still running our 2-for-1 special. At one point in time we were, but you know what? We will be selling tickets all the way up through the start of that first day of Future of Supply Chain. So again, June 4th and 5th, Atlanta, Georgia. I can't guarantee you that the parking's going to be mean, better than in Nashville, but we are super close to the airport. So it's a super easy flight in there. You can take Marta up to the conference center and then just get to hang out with us. And maybe you'll get to see me. Maybe you'll get to see Thomas. If not on the TV stage, maybe on the main stage. I don't know.
I'll be on one of the stages. I still have a banner. I think it's until May. We have a loaded and rolling discount code.
Okay.
We did the little codes. So if you read the newsletter online, I hyperlinked my specific discount code at the very bottom of the newsletter you get in your inbox. You want to check it out. You probably save a little bit of money on that as well. And then, if we do run specials, we'll communicate that out. So you just don't want to miss it. And, tidying it all up full circle, as we got about a minute left here on this podcast, want to encourage everyone, if you are on the fence, even if it's not a FreightWaves concert, get out there and get involved for conferences. Don't feel like you're not the kind of person who, I thought that way too. I'm going to go over here, I'm going to have to write, I'm going to have to do my talk. You actually learn a lot through either the actual act itself or getting to talk to people at the networking events. And that was really fascinating. Don't discount that, because that may be the key. There's always costs involved, but it can set you up to the next time you're in a meeting with your boss. Hey, I learned this over here, spoke to this person. Boom, brownie points.
There you go. So again, live.freightwaves.com to get registered for that one. You can find our full list of upcoming events, the link to register for Future of Supply Chain and for Future of Freight Festival coming up right here in Chattanooga, Tennessee, the beginning of November of this year. Thomas, the people can find your show. Normally you are in this seat, I promise. You are normally here on Tuesday afternoons right here on FreightWaves TV. They can catch your newsletter on Thursday afternoons. You can see me talking community updates with Thomas as well on Thursday mornings. And if you stay tuned through next week, Thomas will be here and he will do it live.